Welcome to my presentation, where we will be discussing the learning objective of Chapter 6, Section 1, Britain's Law and Order Strategy and its Consequences. And we will also be relating that to the video, Rough Crossings, Blacks and the Revolutionary War, that is in correlation to the chapter. Firstly, we will talk about the learning objective of Chapter 6, Section 1, which asks us to explain how Great Britain's response to the destruction of a British shipment of tea in Boston Harbor in 1773 set the stage for the Revolution. The Boston Tea Party was a political protest at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts, on the 16th of December, 1773. American colonists, disappointed and furious with Britain for enforcing taxation without representation, dumped 342 tea chests shipped into the harbor by the British East India Company. Even with the high tension against the British Empire, most colonists would still consider themselves as proud subjects of the strong British Empire. That was until the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, was passed by Parliament in 1774. Many colonists were convinced by the Coercive Acts, which Parliament enacted to punish Massachusetts for failing to pay for the destruction of tea, that Britain was indeed threatening to suppress their freedom. Because of the Boston Tea Party, Great Britain responded and decided to pass the Coercive Acts, which sparked and set the stage for an American Revolution against the British power. Militias, including the Minutemen, were equipped for war by stockpiling guns and ammunition in Massachusetts and other New England colonies. Skirmishes continued in the colonies following the first loss of life at the battles of Lexington and Concord in April of 1775. As Congress met in Philadelphia in July 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed by its representatives, formally breaking relations with Britain and announcing their intention to be self-governing. Now on to the video. The video provided in the module was a narration and explanation of the book, Rough Crossings, which provides an account of the history of thousands of slaves who fled the American Revolutionary War to fight for British cause. The book discusses the many contradictions involved. Some white loyalists were slave owners. Some blacks were recruited for the War of Independence. Stuff that usually you wouldn't think would be going on. As we know now, many African slaves had to fight in the Revolutionary War. Great Britain held the promise of freedom after fighting the war, which led to about 20,000 African soldiers to fight for the Loyalists, compared to about 8,000 that the Patriots had on their side. Because of the promise of freedom, more African slaves on the British side were more willing to join the war. This story relates heavily on the topic of the reasons people would have fought for the Revolutionary War. Most, if not all, African American slaves fighting in the war only fought as an attempt to gain freedom after the war was over. Because many of the war generals of the patriotic side were slave owners, they did not allow African slaves to fight in the war on their side, but they would allow freed slaves to participate. The story involved slaves fleeing to the British side in order to gain a chance of freedom after the Revolutionary War. I appreciate the time put forth to listen to my presentation.